Troy,
Beau.
good morning.
Morning.
For those of you who don't know Troy, he's the co-founder and chief editor of the Nakamoto Project. He's a philosophy professor at Reed College, senior fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and has been a leading voice on Bitcoin's energy and policy impacts and involved in this space since 2011. And he's local, which is great because we're all about local produce here in Oregon.
Yeah, it's really great to be here. It's kind of surreal, actually. As Beau mentioned, I'm most famous for what I don't have and the mistakes I've made. I'm happy to give financial advice. Don't trade away 100 Bitcoin for stocks. You can take that one. You can take me to court on that one. Bitcoin was an idea that appealed to me as a philosopher in 2011, which I thought probably would never work, but it had kind of the right architecture to work. And it represented everything that was the opposite of what I had just witnessed in the collapse of the banking industry and the bailout by the US government, which kind of opened my eyes to the rigged system of money that we live in. And it's amazing to be here today. It's an honor to speak here, and thanks to the organizers for bringing me. Surreal to watch an idea like that, like a philosopher's idea, become real and become a major force in our work, in our world. Thanks to just all of us in this community globally working together in a truly decentralized system. It's absolutely surreal to be here.
So the goal of opening today's session with you, Troy, is we want to really make this easy for beginners to understand not just what this is, but where we are in 2025, help people understand with data, trends, where we're sitting compared to history. So I'd love to kick it off with your work at the Nakamoto Project. One, if you could share with people what the Nakamoto Project is, talk about your 2025 study that you guys just did, and how the world that we live in today from a Bitcoin lens is different than even last year when we were all sitting here.
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned the difference from 2011. I think the price of Bitcoin in 2011 was, when I first started looking at it, like in the single digits, like $1, $2. It's now, what have we taken a gigantic fall? I heard Bitcoin is dead. We've dropped something like 5% from the all-time high. I think it's dead again. It's always either in a bubble or it's dead. And I think it's dead right now. I mean, it's the greatest performing financial asset in history. And you all know that. But Bitcoin is changing. I've watched it change throughout all of the epochs that I've observed it. It started as a niche project for philosophers, really, cypherpunks, philosophers who were also engineers and coders, to express a kind of value of freedom. The cypherpunks saw possible futures for digital money, and one of those futures was grim. A lack of privacy, a lack of the ability to send money to each other except through a trusted intermediary, like a bank. And they actually saw this kind of grim possibility for the future of the whole internet, that all of our communications could be surveilled, could be censored. And Bitcoin was a joint project of a lot of cypherpunks to create a different and more hopeful digital future for all of us, in which we could freely communicate peer-to-peer and privately, and we could also send and receive and store value without asking permission from anyone, and in a way that was uncensorable. So those are the early days, and then that identity of Bitcoin changed, and I think over the past year it's changed very dramatically as institutions and governments have seen the value of Bitcoin as a hard asset. It has a cap of 21 million, and they've seen that they could benefit by owning it or mining it. We see mines in Paraguay, in Ethiopia, in Bhutan, that are sanctioned by the government or owned by the government. We see governments with Bitcoin treasuries we've seen in the last year an executive order from the United States government creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We've seen the embrace along a number of dimensions by Wall Street. We've seen the most successful ETF in history, and it broke the record to whatever, $80 billion in investment, like 5-fold over the previous record holder, which was an S&P index fund. So Wall Street has bought in. We've seen the growth of treasury companies, who are just stacking Bitcoin and financing that through issuing shares or borrowing or whatever. So Bitcoin has transformed from a niche cypherpunk philosophical protest statement to a kind of global force in the traditional political, geopolitical, and financial worlds. So that's kind of if you want a big picture, that's what I see happening. Bitcoin, interestingly, doesn't care about who's adopting it or what they intend to use it for. Bitcoin is for enemies as well as friends. It's a neutral protocol, and its adoption by governments and institutions doesn't mean that we can't use it in the same way we always have been. It doesn't undermine its cypherpunk potential. It in fact enables it by making the asset more valuable and drawing more people into it. This crowd is like double the size of the crowd last year. I mean, there's a kind of global overview. I guess I haven't talked about the Nakamoto Project, and maybe if you can bring up my slide on the screen here, I can kind of show you what we found.
So not a whole lot's different than last year.
Oh, no, really, at what prices, doubled or something in the meantime? I don't really pay attention anymore. The price differences between like 60,000 and 115,000 doesn't really matter when you've sold 100 Bitcoin for socks.
So you've collected a bunch of data to basically show us that nothing's happening. But what was the process of this? Like, what is the Nakamoto Project all about?
Yeah, I'll go back to your question. Yeah, I do a number of things in the Bitcoin space because I love Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. And I do whatever I can to promote this technology and this community. I think it makes for a better world. One of the things I did with Colin Brown, who I don't know if Colin's here, haven't seen him, but also a local Portlander, was we started an organization called the Nakamoto Project, really as a nonprofit educational endeavor, 501c3 pending, in order to communicate about Bitcoin to the broader world. We see ourselves as kind of like exiting the early adopter phase and entering early majority, and we're right there at that chasm between early adopter and early majority. You're still early, but you're not like, you're not like Hal Finney early. But as part of that endeavor, we wanted to do market research, just figure out where we are as in the minds of Americans in particular. What do they think about Bitcoin? And also figure out who owns Bitcoin. What do they like? What makes them tick? And so we partnered with Andy Perkins, who's also now part of the Nakamoto Project. He's the chair of the marketing department at Washington State. And we put together a survey, raised a little bit of money, and ran it last year. We surveyed 3,500 people in the US. We hired a professional survey company to get that sample representative as random as we can get it. And that means, paying people to take surveys, and that means getting the right kind of people to take it. Like old people take surveys a lot, and like retirees, because they've got the time. And so we fill up very quickly with the elderly. But then we have to seek out young, high earners, highly educated. Anyway, we did a pretty good job. This is just a picture of our data where we got people. It looks just like the U.S. population, the racial breakdown, educational breakdown, income breakdown. And I'll tell you what we found. Bitcoin ownership, we measured ownership in a couple ways. my mic? Oh, there, it's back. We measured Bitcoin ownership in a couple ways. On a simple, do you own Bitcoin question, we got about 12.5% of people saying they own Bitcoin. When we asked, do you own Bitcoin on an exchange? Do you hold it in self-custody? Do you have an ETF, a retirement account, jointly with a partner as a business investment? Check all that apply, or none of those ways. We got 18.6% of Americans, or 48 million adults. Just for context, there's about 50 million Catholics in America, according to Pew. So roughly, Bitcoiners equal Catholics as a percentage of the population. Pretty remarkable. And I thought the really special number here was the 23.7% of Bitcoin holders hold it in self-custody, and that's about 4.21% of the population, or 11 million people, who claim to hold Bitcoin in self-custody. I don't know if you wanted to.
What I would like to ask is, one of the surprising things to me is how many people own Bitcoin despite how new it is, versus how many people actually own gold, which is the most common comparison, and when people are like, wow, we should go back on a gold standard. Why do you think so many more people own Bitcoin than gold at this point?
Yeah, and measuring gold ownership is also tricky, so I'm a little bit wary of that claim because I can't get a solid number on how many people own gold, but possibly more people own Bitcoin than gold, or it's an even number. Remarkable, really, and I think some of it has to do with your ability to own small amounts of Bitcoin. I think a lot of the people who own Bitcoin are probably, own it on Cash App, and they have $20 worth. Although recent study by the Reynolds Foundation and Cornell shows that nearly a third of the people who own Bitcoin in the U.S. have more than 25% of their total investments and wealth in Bitcoin. So there's also a sizable percentage who have a significant amount of their wealth in Bitcoin in addition to that small amount. And we know why that is. That's because the number has gone up, right?
Is there any particular type of person that owns Bitcoin more than another type of person?
Okay, good. That's the question we wanted to answer. First of all, it's not a secret that Bitcoin has had a reputation for alignment with political ideology. It has cypherpunk roots. They tended to be libertarian or anarchist, actually a kind of far left or far right horseshoe theory. But more recently, some of the biggest enemies of Bitcoin in the political scene have been Democrats. Some of its biggest proponents have been Republicans. Most notably, Donald Trump has embraced Bitcoin and promised to be the crypto president. And announced a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I mean, just a couple days ago, a report came out from the White House, which was announced on chain in a block. So we have kind of a political alignment, and certainly the critics of Bitcoin, which we've all had to listen to for the past decade and more, in the media, in the mainstream media, have tried to identify it as libertarian derp. Or right-wing nut jobs, or whatever. It's a smear tactic in the media. Also, Bitcoin Twitter, I don't know if people are on there, but also has an idea that Bitcoin is aligned with the right wing in politics. And so we were curious to see whether that was true. This is our 2025 data. You can see that owners are orange, non-owners are gray. Owners are very similar in their political orientation to non-owners. And this has shifted a bit to the right. This is 2025 is orange and 2024 is gray. So before the election of Donald Trump and before Bitcoin and crypto became very central to the election, we had almost perfectly even distribution left-right in Bitcoin ownership. Now it's shifted a tiny bit to the right. That's it. That's the story. We lost some people on the left. We gained some people on the right. Yeah, and among sentiment, how people think about Bitcoin, people who are very liberal think worse about Bitcoin this year than they did last year because it's associated with Trump. But not a whole lot worse. It's slightly tainted by the election, but Not much. Honestly, if I didn't know about last year's data, I would say, oh, Bitcoin's pretty apolitical. Bitcoin does differ in its ownership among men and women and among young and the old. Bitcoin ownership trends young, and it also trends male. So you're twice as likely to own Bitcoin as a man as a woman. You can maybe see that represented here today. No surprise. And the group between like basically 25 and 40 is most likely to own Bitcoin. If you own Bitcoin and you're over like 55, pat yourself on the back. There are very few of you. If you're over 55 and female, you're like a unicorn. Younger people are open to Bitcoin, older people not so much. That was the biggest demographic link. Who owns Bitcoin? Young men. And it tracks other sorts of risky financial activity like sports betting that I looked up. That's also young men. But that's changing.
One interesting question that I was really happy that you guys asked in this, and there was a couple different ways that it was framed, was about openness to people converting some of the U.S.'s gold reserves into Bitcoin. Can you go through what that was all about, how you guys set up the question, kind of what the results of that were?
Sure. We asked a couple questions about the U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve. First of all, we just asked people, is this a good idea to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve? It's been announced in an executive order. And people were skeptical. I would say they were sort of split between neutral, negative, and positive, and with slightly more negative than positive. It sounds like a new and scary idea to people, and they don't really know what it means. On the other hand, when we ask them the following question, the US government is considering converting some of its gold into Bitcoin. If you were advising the US government on how much they should convert, what would you recommend? And gave them a slider from 0 to 100% of converting gold to Bitcoin. We found that people were very reluctant to leave that slider on 0. They 4 and 5 of our respondents took it off 0, and the median allocation was 10%. The mean was over 20%. And again, that was very much skewed by age. This is sort of the percentage of respondents who suggested each level of allocation. You can see 1 to 10% got the most. Also, this is age. Like, look at 26 to 30-year-olds are like, put a third of it in Bitcoin. And it just drops off really nicely with age. We also found gender-wise, is interesting, the most serious Bitcoin haters were old men. Older women would take us slightly off 0. They'd recommend like a 2-3% allocation. But old men were like Peter Schiff zeros.
What else do you think was most interesting to you coming out of this? I mean, what surprised you when you were going through this study?
I was surprised by two things. One was the self-custody number. 11 million Americans claim to hold Bitcoin in self-custody. Unclear to me whether they really understood the question. We tried to explain it. As I said, we're moving into an institutional era of Bitcoin adoption, and Bitcoin's neutrality as a technology depends on us holding our own keys to a sufficient degree and running our own nodes. And so for me, the idea that there are 11 million Americans who take themselves to be shadowy supercoders, in Elizabeth Warren's words, manage their own keys, gasp. That was remarkable. That's 11 million people care about that. It's not just nerds. It's not just a niche philosopher geek thing. That's a large percentage of the population and a large absolute number of people. I was really skeptical of that number and had to kind of drill down to see what that actually looks like. And I think most of that number is not people with hardware wallets or seed signers, and it's people who have a seed phrase but through a phone wallet.
I don't know you to do many things with no purpose. What did you want people to do with this information once you gathered it, published it, put it out there. What's the point of sharing this, and what do you hope people take?
Oh, that's great. In our original goal was to shape a communication strategy. We wondered how we could lock into people's minds. Bitcoin is a wonderful thing. We want to share it. And so we do think we got some insights from that. I don't really want to talk about that. The big upshot, what I think you should take away from it, is that Bitcoin's for everyone. It matches the title of this conference. I think it's easy to get a mistaken idea about who owns Bitcoin. And we see this when we interview respondents. I'm also running another study with somebody at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. We're actually talking in depth about people. And they'll say things like, Bitcoin isn't for me. It's for people who are richer than I am and know more about technology. It's for these crazy tech bros and people who yell things on the YouTube. And it's like, that would be the impression you got if you just looked at YouTube and looked up Bitcoin. It would be the impression you got if you asked the media. It would be the impression you would get if you just tuned in to listen to politicians talk. It would even be the impression, perhaps, if you tuned into Bitcoin Twitter. But it's just not the truth. The vast majority of Bitcoin owners are silent. They don't know a ton about Bitcoin, but they hold some. They're politically moderate. They are curious, open-minded, and looking to build. And they are vast, as many as Catholics. And so I think the picture you should take away is like, it's not just that Bitcoin is in principle for everyone and we want to share it with everyone. It's like a vast cross-section of the American population has already adopted it.
Hi, Troy. Thanks for being here. I'm curious what you would say if you were trying to introduce Bitcoin to people who don't have capital. A lot of the people who can't approach Bitcoin can't do so because they just, are going paycheck to paycheck. So I've got ideas about it. I'm curious what you might think of ways to reach people who do not have capital.
I think that's a great question. One of the things we asked people in another survey that I did with Signal through BPI was, what's keeping you from owning Bitcoin? And they didn't have that as one of the prompts. And I said, you got to put that in as a prompt. I just don't have any money. And sure enough, that was 25% of people said the reason they're not into Bitcoin is they just don't have any money. Especially people in this 18 to 25 range. They're like, I can't even afford my avocado toast. Don't get me started on Bitcoin. I think we got to hear that. Okay, first of all, we got a unit bias problem. People look at Bitcoin's price, $115,000, and they say, I can't buy one of those. It's like, it's just out of my price range. Fix the unit bias problem. You can save $5 in Bitcoin. I mean, do you have anything in a savings account? Just put it in Bitcoin instead. But also, you can plug your life into Bitcoin in very different ways than just putting your money into it. Put your time and labor into it. It's always been true that you can trade your time and labor for Bitcoin. You might be able to plug your business into it. You know how I got into this space was just going on the Bitcoin, talk forums. And that's all it takes. Plug yourself in socially into the future of money. And however that makes sense for you and your life and your business and your talents, hang out with other people who are interested in it. And you might find a way to make a meaningful integration of your life with Bitcoin that doesn't involve your money. And it may end up with you getting some Bitcoin too.
Troy, couldn't you have just summed up your whole thing with these are the people who have 80 IQ? I mean, aren't those the Bitcoiners?
It's the mid-curvers. No, it's the tails. It's basically mid-curve meme. Yeah, 80 IQ and 140 IQ.
I have two questions. The first one is, how are the vibes in this room, man?
Yeah, Bitcoin.
Vibes are high.
All right. And then my actual question is actually kind of the opposite. How do we get the older folks who actually have financial assets interested in this? I mean, I've always been amazed when people come to my meetups or whatever, and they're older and they're getting into Bitcoin. How do we reach out better to that community as well?
Give them Larry Lepard's book. We need boomer representatives for this world, but I mean, I also BlackRock's doing a hell of a job. I mean, they're out there shilling. I can't believe this. BlackRock is shilling Bitcoin. I mean, I thought the whole point was to undermine those guys. Now they're out there shilling it to old people. I do think a lot of the adoption of Bitcoin that's been happening has been indirect. Boomers are going to get it through the S&P 500 and treasury companies and ETFs, and their financial advisors are going to convince them. I think that the boomers will be reached, and they're going to be reached through traditional channels that they trust. Something we found with the 18, 25-year-olds, they didn't want to hear from influencers. They didn't want to hear from advertising. They wanted to hear from people they knew, friends, family. Like Eddie said earlier, we are Bitcoin's marketing department. I can't think of another company that doesn't have a marketing department and that has a product to sell. And while I don't shill Bitcoin to people, I try to share the joy and vision and ethics that it embodies. And we all do that, right? The answer to the how do we reach boomers question, yeah, give them Larry's book, but also just talk to them, befriend them.
Did you ever think you would be on a Bitcoin stage saying BlackRock is doing a hell of a job?
I actually spoke at BlackRock, and that was kind of how I opened, was like, I wanted to put you guys all out of business. And I thought the whole point of Bitcoin was to disintermediate your industry, and they laughed, and I was like, no, I'm serious.
That you have here are a lot higher than I would have expected. Did you ask any questions about when they started stacking, and do you have any sense of how much that's changed in recent years, like say since COVID?
Didn't ask the question of when they bought Bitcoin. We did ask the question of did you hold Bitcoin? Have you held Bitcoin previously but no longer do? And then we asked questions about why they sold. Again, the number one reason why they sold was they needed money. Perfectly good reason. You know, a perfectly good reason to sell Bitcoin, actually. It's functioning as intended. But yeah, I suspect that COVID was a huge boom along in price, in adoption numbers.
And they did know it was Bitcoin. You know, some people get confused. They're like, oh, you mean the XRP one? I have the XRP Bitcoin.
We tried really hard to stop that confusion. Bitcoin is the Kleenex of cryptocurrencies. The name of this particular cryptocurrency is the name for the whole sector for a lot of people, for better, for worse. And that is both to the credit of Bitcoin as a really powerful brand, but also to the detriment. It's like when somebody goes and buys Puffs at the grocery store, the Kleenex executives are like, damn. And that's what happens. And, oh yeah, I have Bitcoin, it's called Solana, it's great. So we actually had, when we started out the survey, we're interested in only Bitcoin, no other cryptocurrencies. In particular, right before the Bitcoin ownership block of questions, we said, again, only Bitcoin, not other cryptocurrencies, not stable coins, not Ethereum, not Solana. So we did our best with it. I'm sure a few still mixed it up, because that's just how it is.
Thanks, Troy. There's no other way to say it. I saw a thing on Bitcoin Twitter that was about the Myers-Briggs breakdown, and it was
INTP.
INT, right? Yeah, right. So just curious what you thought about that, what you've seen in the data you have so far, and kind of where are you thinking about, looking into that at all?
We didn't do Myers-Briggs. I don't know. My research partner, Andy Perkins, isn't into Myers-Briggs, and neither am I, actually, having read about it. It's not my favorite way to classify people, but the correlation with Bitcoin owners being INTP is really striking. I'm also INTP or INFP. It goes back and forth. So I was like, they got me. We did this thing called moral foundations theory, which was a social science framework developed by Jonathan Haidt, which predicts political orientation and voting patterns in America. And basically, we ask a whole bunch of questions that look at the foundations of your moral reasoning, and we map those onto these dimensions of things that you're concerned about, whether it's under the general heading of purity, or respect for authority, or loyalty, or proportionality, also called fairness, equality, care, cultural liberty, economic liberty. And what we found was that Bitcoin holders have a distinctive moral foundations profile, which is different from both liberals and conservatives. And we found exactly the same pattern as we did last year which now we did the same survey twice with 3,500 people in both years. That's 7,000 randomly selected people, and we found the same moral foundations profile. I called it moral maximalism because Bitcoiners almost across the board are higher in their level of moral concern along a lot of these dimensions. And so it's like they're just deeply caring people about right and wrong. It doesn't mean they're better people. That means that they care more along these dimensions. I think the Myers-Briggs thing is really interesting. I hope somebody else studies it. The survey that was done on Twitter that I saw, so not a representative sample. So I don't know how much stock to put in it, but the result was super striking and also fit me and the people I know.
Was that Brandon Quiddiam's?
Yes, it was Brandon Quiddiam.
Yeah, amazing. The mushroom dude. Go ahead.
Hi, guys. I'm really new to this space. Trump gets elected. I know he's pro-crypto, and it explodes, right? And so my question is, was it a false positive in 2028 when we get a new government? Do things change? Are we just seeing a bump because Trump's in there now?
Great question. Of course, that's been my concern from the very beginning. When I came out with this survey last year, I presented it we dropped it right before the Nashville conference where Trump was speaking. And that was basically my warning call to the Bitcoin community is let's not identify the orange brands with each other. They're very distinctive brands. And you get an orange branding effort coming from the Trump side. He wants to get in on some of this good energy we have, get our money and get our support. And he's willing to give us some policy wins because of it. And on the Bitcoin side, we have I can't fault him. He was a genius tactician, David Bailey, running Bitcoin Magazine, who made a play for that support, also identifying the orange brand with the orange man. And so we're reaping the benefits of that, and we also stand to reap. I mean, the survey shows the price that we paid. It's the drop on the left right there, the sentiment dropping among very liberal people. Okay. It's up to us. We are the Bitcoin community. Bitcoin, as Eddie said, doesn't care about your ideology or identity, who you are. It is an open, fair protocol. There's no input field for who you are and what you believe. So the Bitcoin mining and it doesn't know is who controls your mind and what are their politics or religion. It's up to us to keep these brands separate and reach out to people across the political spectrum in events like this, because there's a branding effort, and Bitcoin is ultimately driven by demand. However, I will say the strides we have made in this administration are really significant, and not all of them will be undone. There's some basic freedoms at stake here, like the freedom to write code and not be legally responsible for what people do with your code. The ability to run a node, the ability to custody your own Bitcoin. The Trump administration, for better or for worse, has kind of gone to bat for some of these basic freedoms. And that's good, just unqualifiedly good. And also, the institutional embrace of Bitcoin means if we hit critical mass in 3 years, it's going to be political suicide to go after Bitcoin. And in fact, what the Signal poll showed that I also worked on, is that even among Democrats, saying that you're pro-Bitcoin, it was like maybe 3% of people would be less likely to support you, net. But saying you're pro-Bitcoin for independents was a huge boost, and for Republicans was a huge boost. And the Democratic Party has gotten the message. The Genius Act, which just passed, wasn't exactly a Bitcoin bill, got a lot of Democratic support. Democratic leadership said they wouldn't give any guidance. They wouldn't try to whip against the bill, which is kind of amazing given that they whip against everything that the other side is for. So I think it's up to us to both keep the message of Bitcoin solid and neutral. It is neutral money. That's the whole point. Reach out to all Americans and really all people around the world. But also for us to get enough wins in the next 3 years that we are entrenched as part of America, and trying to attack Bitcoin be like trying to attack the internet.
Amazing. I'm told that's our last question. Thank you.